Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker for the evening, Chairman Omali Yeshitela.
Uhuru, I want to express a tremendous appreciation to Comrade Jesse for that introduction, and to the African People's Solidarity Committee and Uhuru Solidarity Movement that works on this leadership. The members of the Central Committee of the party have already been acknowledged, and so I won't do that, and also the leadership of the African People's Solidarity Committee. I'd like to start off by saying that it is important, the work that the Solidarity Movement is doing is exemplary work. It is mandated in the Constitution that this African People's Solidarity Day happens annually. And it does happen in various places throughout the United States. It is something that recognizes that the struggle we are involved in right now, the issues of Mike Brown and Ferguson, the issues concerning Life Malcolm, fighting the struggle in Tampa, began a long time ago. And I want to just express appreciation to all of you who've come out to unite in solidarity with my people. And I want to begin by saying that, that I'm a revolutionary, which means that I do not see any future for happiness for Africans or anybody else on this earth as long as this prevailing social system continues to exist. And that the cop who came to Life Malcolm's house and arrested him about the dog, or who gunned down Mike Brown on August 9th in Ferguson, Missouri, or who murdered Tyrone Lewis on the 24th of October 1996, they were set in motion 600 years ago when Portugal in 1450 attacked Africa and began to kidnap African people and bring us into this enslaved conditions of existence. And this is something that's difficult for a lot of people to understand, because some people see us having this discussion in a fashion that suggests to them that when we talk about the oppression of African people, that somehow we're saying that other people do not bleed and other people are not pained as well. When we talk about the numbers of African people who are stuck in prison systems and police kill us in the streets, we're saying that other people are not in prison and other people do not get shot by the police. That's not what we're saying. What we are saying is that everybody is involved in the contradictions that we are confronted with in this world today as a consequence of Europe putting its foot on the continent of Africa and forcing an African to do something against his or her will. Everybody, all of us, are suffering contradictions today as a consequence of a war that began against black people 600 years ago next year. I think it's fundamental for us to understand that. We're not talking about something new. African people have been engaged in a struggle for 600 years, and the brutality that has been imposed on Africa and African people, the transformation of an entire continent, 12 million square miles of nothing but value, richness, etc., turned into a place for the breeding of human beings who would be enslaved and dispersed around the world. When we look at this system itself, I'm talking about the one that Obama claims to be protecting. Every time a drone missile murders somebody in Pakistan or in Afghanistan or someplace else or Northern Africa, this system came into being not because of the genius of white people. And this is necessary to say because a narrative has been created at the expense of everybody else, including the expense of white people who have come to believe this nonsense, at least on the surface. I say it's surface because every time white people look in the mirror, they see themselves. They know they're not all that. But a narrative has been created that this perfect world, this magnificent world, this shining city on the hill has something that has been ushered forth because of the goodness of white people, because of the Christianity and civilization of white people, and the deficit of both those things by Africans and everybody else on the planet Earth. It is nonsense, and it is horrible. It is horrible not because of what it imposes on Africa and African people. To have an entire population, to have an entire 1.5 billion people on the planet Earth who have been defined as non-entity, as bestial, and who have been brutalized in such a fashion that many have come to believe that we are exactly what the oppressor has said we are. Comrade Penny Hesse was quoting to you about the brutality that's described in the book by Baptist. It's a new and important book, but the book is not an accident in the sense that there's a crisis in this social system that none of the explanations that have been offered in the past are satisfying. None of the explanations that are being put forth can serve to satisfy anybody. It doesn't work anymore. And increasingly, what we find is more and more forces are having to face a reality. And every living white person on the planet Earth owes his or her existence to the brutality that has been imposed on Africa, African people, and other people around the world. That's just the way it is. There is nothing logical otherwise about the fact that 80% of the people on Earth trying to survive off $10 or less. There's nothing logical about the reality that 50% of the people on Earth are trying to survive off $2.50 or less, and that if you're in Africa, you're lucky if you have $1 a day to try and survive off. And when you look around the world and you see the majority of the people do not have clean water, the majority of people on Earth are uncertain about how they will eat the next day. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people have been forced to this forced immigration. Terrorism everywhere, every aspect of our lives. Not just in places on the continent of Africa, but also in St. Petersburg, Florida, and in Ferguson. I've just heard that they're now saying that Van Derek Myers, he was murdered on October 8th in St. Louis proper on Shaw Street in Shaw, in the 42nd block of Shaw. He was gunned down by cops because the cops said that they saw Van Derek, he was 18 years old. They saw him and some of his friends standing near a store. And when the cop turned around, he's a uniformed cop, but he's being hired in a private situation now. There's a wealthier block in this area that hires cops, so that even though they're cops, they're working for this block. And so they're saying that Van Derek, 18 years old, he's at the store. The police sees him and turns around. And he sees the police, according to the cops, and runs. And the cop chases him. And then he's dead. Now they're saying they found gunshot residue on his hands and in his pants. Look at what happened with Mike Brown. He just walking down the streets. The cop sees him walking down the streets. This is what the police say. Rolled up on him. Told him, we don't want you to walk in the street. As a consequence of this contact, Mike Brown dead, shot at least 7 times. Look at young brother who we were just talking about, gunned down here in 1996, Tyron Lewis. He's just driving his car. The cop sees him at the stop and stop him. He's dead, gunned him down. And none of the instances that I just mentioned did the police suggest that the persons who they murdered had committed any kind of crime at all. But, if he did have a gun, but somebody condemned an Afghan who was in Afghanistan for shooting at a policeman, at a cop, at a soldier, you say, wow, he shouldn't have shot at the police. He did commit a crime because he shot at the cop or at the policeman. What I'm telling you is that occupation, colonial occupation, is colonial occupation whether it happens in Afghanistan, Palestine, Pakistan, or in the United States. It's a colonial occupation. It is a colonial occupation. And the forces who are running through our communities with guns on are colonial soldiers. They are occupying forces. That's all they are. That's all they are. That's all they are. That is the reality that African people experience. You may have a different relationship with the police, but I'm telling you the reality that African people are experiencing. So you cannot be sympathetic to the community in Ferguson. You cannot be sympathetic to Mike Brown on the one hand and try to hold up the police department on the other hand. Because the reality that we experience every day, do you know that you would not have had an uprising in Ferguson if what happened to Mike Brown was unusual? There wouldn't have been an uprising. Bad cop. Somebody made a mistake, bad training, hell. But when you look at a situation where even according to the FBI, working with faulty data from only less than 5% of the police departments around this country reporting, and they're saying, the FBI, that twice a week, a white policeman shoots an African in this country. And there are people who do not want to make a connection between the police murders of our people, between the numbers of Africans who are locked up in these prisons, and the fact that you're looking at a population that is here, not as some immigrant population, but as captives. That's how we came to this country, as captives. There is a connection. And the narrative that has existed up to now has to be changed. Because you cannot get on a boat in Africa as an African and get off in Jamestown, Virginia as a Negro. If we were Africans when we got on that damn boat in Africa, we were Africans when we got off that boat. And if there's somebody who wants to insist that we are not Africans, it's because at the moment we say that those black people are Africans, then the question comes up, who the hell are we? That's the profound question that has to be dealt with. The narrative has to be changed. Revolution is the only way out of this thing. I appreciate the presentation that Comrade Penny has made. It's not that old typical feel-good presentation. That old typical, let us all walk off into the sunset hand in hand and everything's going to be all right tomorrow. It was a presentation that was substantiated by empirical data, by historical stuff that you can leave here and go check it out yourself. When we look at what's happening in Africa, and I want to say this to you, because everybody is talking about Ebola, right? And you look at Africa, few people dispute the fact that human life originated in Africa. Few people dispute that. Yet you look at Africa, you find it disease-ridden, you find famine, hostile nature, etc. It appears. It doesn't make any sense. Because if human life originated in Africa, if we know nothing else, Africa is not hostile to life. Africa embraced life like no other continent, no other place on earth did embrace life. Which is why I started there. Between the 4 short years, and I talk about this all the time, of 1347 and 1351, half the white people on earth died of plague. Black plague, they called it. And we innocent. O.J. did it. Half the white people on earth died of plague. And you cannot have a viable economy. It's impossible. And I say half, but at least half the white people. They used to say a third, etc. But the more they're forced to deal with the question, at least half the white people on earth died of plague in 4 short years. I mean, for the next 100 years, Europeans were still, what they now call Europeans, were still dying of this thing, but in 4 years, half the people died. You cannot have a viable economy if half the people die in 4 years. Farmers died, mechanics died, cooks died, bakers died, dogs died, horses died, cows died. And the Pope was so scared he got out of town, even though he had a special relationship with God, we are told. And Europe ends up rescuing itself through venturing out, slavery, going to Africa, kidnapping black people, going around the world, China, the aggression in China and various other places, to what they now refer to as the Americas. Europe cured itself. The plague is no longer there. But the places where Europe went to, where there were resources and continue to be resources today, the parasite latched on to them. The parasite became, before Ebola, the parasite was European capitalism, European imperialism. That's what's killing black people all around the world. It's a parasite. It's a parasite. So now Europe and Europeans are well off. Like a lot of people like to run around talking about, we are the 99% my ass. We're talking about a situation where 80% of the people on earth, 80%, 8 out of every 10, 10 out of every 100, 100 out of every 1,000 human beings on the earth are trying to survive of less than $10 US a day. And half the people on earth are trying to survive off $2.50 or less a day. And in Africa, if you're lucky, you can make $1 a day. You have people who wake up on the continent of Africa, wake up in the morning and go scrambling and work and search and hustle all day just to have enough food for that day. They don't have paved roads in most of Africa. They don't have refrigerators in most of Africa. In Sierra Leone, where they're talking about Ebola as being so devastating, they don't even have clean water on an electric grid. Their housing is in the magnificent structures of Amsterdam. Their food is in somebody's refrigerator in Europe and North America. Their paved streets, you'll find them in Tampa and in Manhattan. That is the reality of the world that we live in today. And we're saying it doesn't have to be like that. But the narrative has to be changed. And I'm also saying right now that I recognize that the discussion that we're having is coming from a minority position. Even in the African community, there are people who will rock you to sleep, who will tell you everything's all right. It's going to be all right. All you got to do is just hold hands and sing this right song or pray this right prayer. They'll tell you this. And it's a relief. A lot of people won't come to this meeting because you hear what you're hearing now. And they'll go to that other meeting, but sooner or later, you're going to have to hear. That's what people all over the Middle East are saying today. If, in fact, 9/11 did not happen by the CIA or some other institution here, then that was a statement that people have made that the existing narrative does not work. That's what's happening. That's why the perennial warfare that's going on, because people are struggling to change the relationship they have with Europe and white power and North America. It is being changed. Even as we have this discussion, America will never be the same again. I'm telling you, it won't be the same again. Look at 10 years from now. You're going to remember I told you this. Because politicians after politicians will come to you in a line and say everything's going to get better, just spend some more money. And increasingly, you having less money to spend because Obama or the next guy gave it to the banksters. Because the people throughout South America are taking their resources back for themselves. Because the people in the Middle East are taking the oil back for themselves. Because people everywhere want to be able to feed their own children and to guarantee that they're going to have a life. The question that's before all of us is whether or not we'll be able to stand on the right side of history. We say that we're living now at a time of an uneasy equilibrium. We're living where there's a magnificent contest that's happening between the past and the future. The past is that past of slavery and colonialism that shaped and defined the reality that we're living with now. That's the past. That's over. You might as well face it. It's gone. That's the past. The future is the future of free people on the planet Earth. That's what everybody is fighting for. Obama says that they're killing ISIS. They were bombing ISIS. If it's not ISIS, then it's Islamic State. If it's not Islamic State, it's ISIL. If it's not ISIL, we're bombing somebody. But when you look at it, when it's Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, ISIL, Islamic State, what they're bombing is Arabs. It's Arabs that they're murdering. They just give it this name for the time being. They call it a terrorist, they call it ISIL, they call it IS, but what you find is that it was America and Europe that went there, created the existing borders there, stole the land, stole the oil, imposed dictatorships on the lives of the people who want to be free. And if white people want to be free, how is it so damn hard to understand that everybody else wants to be free too? Why should that be so hard to understand? Obama is killing Arabs. And he's killing Arabs because some time ago, Europe began an aggression there first. They call it a holy war. Remember that? The holy war, the crusades. They were looking for, what was it they said they were looking for? Anybody remember? They're looking for the Holy Grail. They didn't seem to find the Grail, but they found plenty of loot there. The struggles that's happening today, the reason you have what they call Islamic fundamentalists is because they were attacked by Christian fundamentalists. Because Christian fundamentalists years and years and years and years ago invaded and ripped them off. and created the existing borders and conditions of existence people suffer from today. But then, it was a looting expedition under religious banner. Much of that's happening today under religious banner. It's hardly subtle. Islamic fundamentalists and what have you. And then, as though somehow people just grew up and say, hate white people, hate white people. That's why I have a real struggle with a lot of black nationalists. Because sometimes they go and make up stuff on white people, which is extraordinarily redundant, to say the least. I mean, they make up. You don't have to. There's a history of murder and bloodshed that spans the globe. But we believe that everybody can live on this planet. Everybody can live on this planet. And nobody has to live at the expense of anybody else. And that is the responsibility of all of us who are interested in having a just world. But you can't get to the just world without understanding the nature of the social system that we are living with today. This thing that we call racism is a natural byproduct of a system, a political economy that has its basis in slavery and colonialism. Any good Marxist will tell you that a society is comprised of an economic base and a superstructure. And the superstructure, those are the ideas. Those are the political institutions. Sometimes that's reflected in culture, even religion. The things that people think. How you think you're going to have slavery and colonialism and then produce this wonderful, splendid, humane society and ideas? You can't do it. So what you call racism is a natural expression of ideas and institutions built off slavery and colonialism. You want to get rid of racism? Let me see your hands. Come on. If you want to get rid of racism, then you got to struggle to destroy the social system based on slavery and colonialism. You've got to unite with the oppressed to overturn this relationship. Because it is an objective truth that every dream of happiness, every aspiration of a future for your children, a good college, decent schools, retirement funds, all of that requires the perennial war that's going on for it to be maintained under this existing social system. In fact, the thing that gave rise to the Tea Party and the so-called occupation movement is the growing struggle by people to take back their resources, which meant that now that school loan is harder to pay for, which means that a lot of old people are not going to be able to get that 401, what do you call it? K. The retirement stuff is gone, it's shot, because people are taking back their resources. That's why it is so easy for demagogic politicians to mobilize the white world and the white community to make these wars, because they want to be able to get the retirement fund back. Want to make the economy provide more jobs. That's why this economy requires that. This economic system requires that. So I really appreciate y'all listening to me. I was in Ferguson because they killed this young brother. And they murdered him. And if you've ever been in Ferguson and parts of Missouri in the summertime, it gets extraordinarily hot there. So it was 100 degrees plus when we arrived there. And they had gunned down Mike Brown. And then they left him on the asphalt. Left his body on the asphalt in the housing project for 4.5 hours in 100+ degree weather. You imagine what that body was going through in that kind of weather. But they do that all the time. They say, you know, they got to do this investigation, et cetera, but the reason they do it is because they want to leave that there as a terrorist entity to terrorize the community. That this can happen to you too, nigga. It is ordinary. It is not even extraordinary. The reason we are talking about Ferguson and Mike Brown is because the young African working class rose up in Ferguson. And the chant that came out of Ferguson that I read in the media was, "Kill the police." That's a hell of a statement. They weren't saying, "We shall overcome." They said, "Kill the police." And that's the statement that's made by a community that have with this particular kind of relationship with this military force that occupies our community and that guns down our children on a regular basis. Kill the police, they said. Panthers used to say, "Off the pigs." But they were less eloquent in Ferguson. Kill the police. And then they rose up in Ferguson. And in a sustained rebellion, powerful, sustained rebellion. And I talked to a comrade I met when I got there. He said, when they went out there, they told the people, said, okay, the people all excited, said, Monday, we're going to have a demonstration. They said, no, we're demonstrating now. This is what the people said, we're demonstrating now. And then they moved out and they put all kinds of military force down on them. And the people responded heroically. They still fighting in Ferguson. 70 days later, they still involved in resistance in Ferguson. And so the people rose up against the wisdom of veteran movement people who said, let's go Monday. They said, let's go now. And then you saw in Ferguson, this is why the leadership of my party sent me to Ferguson, because they brought out people like Al Sharpton. We call him Al Charlatan, who, among other things, is an informant, a snitch, who snitched on the movement for the FBI, wore wire for the FBI against our own movement. And so people said, Sharpton's in there, you got to go in Ferguson. And so that's how I happened to go into Ferguson. And it was important to be to Ferguson because this resistance was something that raised the morale of African people throughout this country. When they saw Africans dealing with those tanks, everybody felt good about that. All the black people everywhere felt good about Ferguson. And what you saw happening in Ferguson is the government brought in every sellout in the country. They had more sellouts per square inch in Ferguson than probably any place else in the country. You know, they brought Al Sharpton, they brought Jesse Jackson, they brought T.D. Jakes. I don't know what the hell T.D. Jakes was doing now. I can see they had Spike Lee. Well, I know Spike can make a movie, you know, or something like that. I mean, everybody was there that you can imagine. They brought in, what's that woman that y'all like on this, does a reality show that got a funny name? What's her name? Yeah, they brought that woman in. Everybody tell the people to be peaceful, and everybody condemning the violence of the young people, the violence of the hoodlums, the violence of the thugs. When the truth of the matter is, nobody would have been there except those young people rose up and fought back. That's what got Sharpton in there. That's what got Sharpton the ability to come in and make a speech, because those people engaged in that sustained resistance there, right? And so we saw this magnificent thing happening. And the struggle of our people is a struggle for national liberation. Everybody, it doesn't mean everybody's conscious of it, But that's what the struggle is, because we are oppressed as a national entity. The dispersed African nation, dispersed all around the world, oppressed in Africa, in Haiti, in Jamaica, oppressed in Ghana, oppressed right here in this country, an oppressed nation. That's what we're experiencing. And so when you saw the movement happening in Ferguson, you saw the liberation, the national liberation movement taking off. All kinds of people. You know, a nation is comprised of all kinds of forces. You don't just have revolutionary workers. You got Uncle Tom's part of the nation, right? You got middle class people in there. You got intellectuals. You got artists. You know, national identity is your primary identity, but we got nations. People have different kinds of identities, and all of the African nation is oppressed. But freedom for different sectors of the nation means different things. Freedom for a sector of the African middle class or petty bourgeoisie simply means freedom to get ahead in the system. For them, that's freedom. Freedom for the vast majority of our people cannot come within the context of the existing social system. So the workers mean something different by freedom than Al Sharpton and his crew. Al Sharpton is just a sellout trader. He's a comprador. But there are others who can be satisfied with reforming the police department, things like that. For them, that's freedom. Others have to understand that the best thing we can do with the police, is the community got to control. Any thugs, any people walking around with guns in this community ought to be controlled by the people in this community. At minimum, the progressive demand has to be community control of the police. That African community control of the police, that's the minimum demand. And that's on the way toward, that's an anti-colonial demand. That's the demand that calls for power to the people, as opposed to police review board, where we go and review somebody else's power. Right? And so in Ferguson, we saw the whole nation. And the problem is that the African working class does not have its own organization, its own capacity, its own connection to the media, its own organizing skills and things like that. So what that means is the petty bourgeoisie ends up speaking in the name of the whole black community, right? Which is why we had to go into Ferguson. And it was interesting. So we saw this contest on and on. The middle class leaders say, we're going to go out, we're going to march to the police station. That was on August 30th. We say, right on, march to the police station. Then they said, psst, psst, we're just going to march to the park. And they marched to the park, and then some people close to us were saying, let's go to the police station, let's go to the police station. We get to the park, and I'm cool, because I'm a part of this coalition that has been developed in Ferguson to deal with the leadership coalition. I'm cool, because I just know, despite what I'm not able to do with some of the demands, etc., I'm going to be able to do when I get to that platform. All I want is the microphone. You hear me, life? And so we march to the park. And we get to the park, and everybody and his cousin spoke. And the stage was too big for a lot of people to be up there, so they said, wait off the stage. So I got to the stage, finally, I'm going to speak. And I said, "Ara," and then they bum rushed me off the stage. When I said revolution, they threw me off the stage. But that was all right, because the people had already started leaving, going to the police station. And so we went to the police station, where I got control of the mic, okay, and was able to make an intervention. My point is that there's class struggle that happens inside the struggle for national liberation. It's wonderful watching this. We talk about the uneasy equilibrium. Well, Ferguson and the rebellion is a part of that uneasy equilibrium. The future is attempting to emerge. And within that context, we see the contest between the workers and the African middle class, petty bourgeoisie. So just the other day, last Sunday, was it last Sunday or Sunday before last? We went into, we attended this incredibly huge forum that happened there. And Cornel West, Dr. Cornel West was to be the main speaker. They had rabbis, imams, preachers from different denominations, humanists from South Africa, all on the platform, and maybe 3,000 people in the room. What an incredible thing. And then the preacher spoke, and the rabbi spoke, and the imam spoke, and the guys from NAACP spoke, and when he started speaking, a group of people stood up and turned their backs to the NAACP leader. I said, what's going on here, right? And then they started walking out. When they started walking out, a lot of people started applauding them, right? And then finally the people started intervening in such a way that they had to stop the program and let the people speak. Because what you have in Ferguson is a group of people who for 2 months have been engaged in struggle, dodging tear gas and rubber bullets, and they have become seasoned fighters in the streets of Ferguson. And they saw all those people sitting up there on that platform, never facing tear gas, never facing the bullets, never doing anything but just standing up, pontificating. And so the people intervened. And it made it necessary then for these people to come up. And they were extraordinarily eloquent, even though one brother couldn't say anything but MF, 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 but they were eloquent as hell. And they made it clear that they said that you all people, you know, from this other period, etc. And it was a magnificent thing to behold. But here's what happened. I'm going to say this and shut up. Here's what had happened. In the 1960s, the United States government murdered the leaders of this revolution, many of the leaders of this revolution. It imprisoned scores and hundreds more. I was one of them. I was in and out of prison. They assassinated the co-founder of the African People's Socialist Party in 1968 alone. They killed more than 30 members of the Black Panther Party. They arrested more than 300 members of the Black Panther Party. And there are others who names you don't even know, who are being rounded up and wiped out. And then, after they crushed that movement, destroyed our revolutionary organizations, dispersed the members of the organization, then they raised up another sector of our community, of these Negroes who were opposed to the revolution. And they started saying, this is black power, right? And we've gone 2 generations without young people having any revolutionary experiences, any revolutionary forces they can look back on. Only thing they've got is social media militancy, liking this or that on Facebook or something to that effect. They got Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackal. They have no revolutionary forces that has represented them in the past. And so now, what they are rising up against, it ain't old that they're rising up against, it's that reactionary petty bourgeois force that has come to take the place of the revolution that they're rising up against. And that was something to behold. And that's what I'm saying, that in Ferguson we saw the emergence of the future. Doesn't mean that all the people who were there, because a lot of people in Ferguson from everywhere. Ferguson is functioning as an incubator in many ways for revolutionary struggle. People from everywhere, white people, what people have characterized as Middle Easterners, Africans, everywhere in Ferguson. It's like a mall. It's like a mall of resistance. Demonstration happening over here, sit-in happening over there, sleep-in happening over there, vigil happening over there, all over Ferguson, that's what's going on. And last Saturday, that was last Saturday, wasn't it? Last Saturday, we saw a situation where people came out to this demonstration, maybe 5,000 people. It was interesting because somebody asked how many people were from Ferguson and St. Louis area, and it was a minority. And Africans may have been a bare minority in that group of people. And it would give somebody the impression that the struggle is slowing down in Ferguson, but it's not slowing down in Ferguson. It's like an incubator. People come to Ferguson, they're going back to different places, and they're going to be engaged in various kinds of struggles there. But the other thing is, in Ferguson, the African workers and other people who live this struggle every day, they are still dealing in Ferguson, even if they're not at those massive demonstrations. They just were at a demonstration, was that day before yesterday, night before last, right? They had demonstration, I was there midnight. They were demonstrating on Shaw against the murder of Von Derek Myers and what have you. These are people, Africans from right there, and they're dug in. And we just had a meeting in Ferguson on Friday. And because everybody went to Ferguson, just like people in this room for different reasons, people came to Ferguson for different reasons. We went there because we're going to make a revolution. That's all I'm there for. Because Mike Brown, we can find a Mike Brown every place, but there's a certain consciousness, mass consciousness that has emerged in Ferguson. So we're there in Ferguson to intervene, to take science into this whole revolutionary process, because one of the missing ingredients in Ferguson is that there was no coherent message coming out of Ferguson. We want to take science, and we want to leave something in Ferguson, revolutionary organization in Ferguson. And that's what we did last Friday. We had a magnificent meeting there and pulled together an organization. NPDOM is there on the ground in Ferguson. And not only is it on the ground in Ferguson, up to now, it's a women's organization. It's the sisters, who are leading this incredible movement. And that makes us, doubly proud and doubly hopeful, because that's the future too. Looking us straight in the face, and so that's part of what I would say, about Ferguson. I've spoken a long time, and I just want to remind you of this, that on November 1st and 2nd, we're going to have this rally and march on the White House in Washington, D.C. It's called, the theme is Peace Through Revolution. And there's going to be a rally starting at noon at Malcolm X Park. There's an array of endorsers and participants, from Cynthia McKinney to Answer and to Charles Barron, the guy who's on the city council and who's almost elected to the state assembly in New York, to Lawrence Ham, the chair of the People's Organization for Progress out of New Jersey. Just a whole array of forces are going to be there on the ground. We're going to have a magnificent rally. Then we're going to march on the White House. That's on the first day. And on the second day, when I say we, I'm talking about the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparation that we helped to build. And on the second day, we're going to have a teach-in where we're going to deal with some of these issues, because our struggle is to move away from just feel-good discussions. We're going to talk about reparations and a plan to pursue reparations. Brother named Cam Howard out of Chicago is going to lead that discussion. We're going to talk about mass incarceration of Africans. A student group called Students Against Mass Incarceration is going to be dealing with that discussion. We're going to talk about things like also the wars that's happening on, this stuff that's going on in Ukraine, this madness that the U.S. is involved in, this contest with China that's threatening not only the peace in various parts of the world, but possible nuclear conflagration. This is stuff that we are looking at and people don't have too much understanding of and don't necessarily recognize the significance of all of that to what's going on here in this country. So, and the thing about about this mobilization that's also so important is that we control the microphone here, Life. Our mic, our agenda, ain't nobody kicking nobody off the platform for bringing up the question of revolution. And I want to say that this is important because I cannot remember a time where the U.S. was not engaged in some kind of war, where there was not some kind of peace movement. But the problem in every instance has been that people have protested the war as a particular policy. War as a policy of this government. Most times when they come out against the war, they were against what the Republicans were doing. They were against what Johnson was doing. They've talked about war as a particular policy. And they've talked about war without talking about the fact that the reason war is happening is because imperialism, is trying to frustrate the ability of the people to achieve their freedom. We're saying that it's not enough just to say peace. We have to say victory to the oppressed. It's not enough just to say peace in Afghanistan. We have to say victory to the people of Afghanistan against U.S. imperialist settler occupation. We have to be united with the oppressed. That's what's necessary. So we say peace through revolution because we have to identify the fact that there is a social system that's at work here. It's not a particular policy by a particular regime, but a social system. And even though we know the revolution is not going to happen tomorrow, we have to put it on the agenda. So we say peace through revolution. And people in my community know about this thing they call layaway program. Y'all know about layaway. When you ain't got enough money to buy something outright, you go and you put it on layaway. Don't you, Deputy Chair? You put it on layaway, and you pay a little bit at a time, with the objective that when you get enough, you're going to get the whole thing. That's how we see this question of peace through revolution. Revolution won't happen tomorrow, probably, right? But revolution has to be on the agenda. We got it on layaway, and everything that we do, including this meeting, is payment on that revolution that's on layaway. Uhuru. Thank you.